Thank you for tuning in. You're watching V News. Coming up next are top stories.
Cabinet scrutinizes 7-month socio-economic development. Post-flood rescue efforts continues in Quảng Ninh province. International tourist arrivals to Vietnam rebound in July.
Prime Minister Nguyễn Tấn Dũng on July 31st presided over the Cabinet's monthly meeting. We have more in the following report.
Cabinet members looked into the country's socio-economic situation in July and the first 7 months of this year. During the January to July period, the macroeconomy was stabilized, while security and social welfare were guaranteed. July's consumer price index increased by 0.13% over the previous month and 0.9% against the same period last year. This month's total export revenue exceeded $14.5 billion, up 1.2%, the meeting held. The participants proposed solutions to remove difficulties faced by businesses and agreed to continue implementing social welfare policies. They also deliberated the equitization of state-owned enterprises and the building of e-government. Speaking at the meeting, Prime Minister Nguyễn Tấn Dũng said the targets set earlier this year are achievable. He highlighted the bright prospects for the agriculture sector and urged more efforts to boost exports and reduce trade deficit. The leader asked relevant ministries and agencies to implement measures in a comprehensive manner, focusing on key areas to advance economic growth rate at 6.28% or more.
Mozambican Prime Minister Carlos Agostinho do Rosario and Vietnamese Deputy Prime Minister Hoàng Trung Hải have agreed to strengthen ties between the two countries through increasing delegation exchanges and high-level meetings, and supporting each other at international forums and organizations.
The consensus was reached during talks in the capital city of Maputo, Mozambique, on July 30th. At the meeting, the two leaders discussed new partnership orientations in disaster forecast and traffic management. Deputy Prime Minister Hai stated that Vietnam is willing to share experience in agriculture, oil and gas exploitation, and telecommunications with Mozambique, and will continue to have Mozambique train technical officials. After the talks, the House and guests attended a press conference to announce orientations to boost bilateral relations. Talking to the two countries' press agencies, the Mozambican Prime Minister affirmed that the two nations will make every effort to deep economic, trade and investment links. The same day, Prime Minister Rosario hosted a banquet for Deputy Prime Minister Hai and his entourage.
The Vietnam Embassy in the U.S. has celebrated the 20th founding anniversary of the two countries' diplomatic relationship, July 12, 1995, with a ceremony in Washington, D.C. Addressing the ceremony in Washington, D.C. on July 30th, Vietnamese Ambassador Phạm Quang Vinh thanked U.S. officials, scholars and people for their support to the development of bilateral ties over the past 20 years. The diplomat said in the last 2 decades, Vietnam and the U.S. have made great strides across the board, with trade shooting up 70 times from 1995 to reach $36 billion last year, and with the U.S. as the fourth largest investor in Vietnam. At the ceremony, Senator John McCain, chairman of the U.S. Senate Committee on Armed Services, noted that the relationship between the two countries have grown beyond expectations in various aspects. The senator also called on the U.S. to consider easing the ban on the sale of lethal weapons to Vietnam. For his part, Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs Daniel Russell said the U.S. is currently hosting 17,000 Vietnamese students and about 85,000 tourists from the Southeast Asian country visited the U.S. last year. Education cooperation and people-to-people exchanges are the highlights of their linkages, he said. As heavy torrential rain continues in Quảng Ninh province, rescue efforts are being rolled out to assist local residents and stranded tourists. As of July 30th, more than 250 out of 1,500 visitors stuck on Koto Island have been returned to the mainland safely. after 5 days of being stranded due to a heavy rainfall and flooding. As of 1800 July 30th, 254 holidaymakers have been picked up by a naval ship, HQ 634, and returned to the mainland. All passengers were reported to be in healthy condition. Upon arriving in Kairong port, the tourists were dispatched to local shelters via buses. In other developments, the persistent rainfall has caused landslide in several areas, blocking traffic between Kampha and Vendon districts. Local authorities are still working on removing the debris and opening up the road. As of July 31st, the Quảng Electricity Company reported more than 1,700 households in Vendon Island district still have to live without power because electricity cannot be provided until the flood subside. A low-pressure area in northeastern Vietnam created the heaviest rainstorm in 40 years, with 17 people dead, 6 fishermen still missing, and $68.8 million caused in damage. Moving on to other news, the border guard forces of Vietnam's northern Lao Cai province and Hung Hue County of China's Yunnan province have organized a joint anti-terrorism drill named the Red River No. 1 2015.
The scenario portrays that after conducting terrorist attacks in a locality in China, several terrorists ran to the border area of Yunnan's Hue Khẩu district, adjacent to the Vietnamese province Bát Sát and Bảo Thang district and Lao Cai city, for illegal entry. Thanks to effective coordination, both sides quickly arrested the terrorists and maintained a border of peace and friendship. Through the drill, Vietnamese and Chinese forces shared experiences in dealing with terror criminals, intensifying collaboration and upholding vigilance.
The Pacific Fleet of the Russian Navy anchored at Tiên Sa port on July 31st, beginning their friendship visit to the central city of Da Nang through August 2nd. The fleet is commanded by Colonel Potapov Alexander Valerievich and carries 482 officers and crew members on board. The visit is intended to intensify bilateral defense cooperation between the two armies and the two navies in particular. During their stay, the naval officers and crew members plan to lay wreaths at the city's monument for war martyrs and heroes, pay courtesy visits to leaders of the Municipal People's Committee and the High Command of the Naval Region 3, and visit several tourist attractions in Da Nang and the surrounding provinces. Vietnamese footwear exports rose 21.2% against the same period last year to more than $5.85 billion for the first 6 months of this year, the General Department of Customs reported. Of the figure, exports to the U.S. increased by 30.2% to $2 billion, equal to export earnings from the EU, which saw a growth of 17%. According to statistics from the Office of Textiles and Apparel at the U.S. Department of Commerce, the U.S. imports about 78% of footwear from China and 12% from Vietnam. However, footwear imports from China have fallen steadily since 2010, the U.S. office said. Meanwhile, imports from other Asian countries, particularly from Vietnam, have increased sharply in recent years as U.S. businesses try to become less dependent on Chinese imports. Nguyễn Đức Thuận, president of the Vietnam Leather and Footwear Association, said the industry is likely to fulfill its target of $14.5 billion in exports this year, with an annual growth of 20%. Last year, Vietnam exported $10.34 billion worth of footwear, a rise of 23% over the previous year, making up 6.89% of the country's total exports. The Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development is planning to invest in advanced technologies to improve productivity and quality of the coffee sector. This is part of activities to implement the ministry's master plan to develop the coffee processing system by 2020 in a bid to increase the added value of domestic coffee products. The sector also seeks to foster connections between farmers and processing enterprises to ensure sustainable development of the sector. There are currently 239 coffee processing firms across the country, the majority of which are located in the southeastern and central highlands regions. Vietnam is the world's second biggest coffee bean producer and exporter, with 641,700 hectares of coffee plants producing at least 1.3 million tons of coffee each year. However, finished processed coffee products such as roasted and ground coffee and instant mixed coffee account only for 4.1 to 6% of the total coffee production, which has limited the added value of the coffee sector. The ministry has set its sight on yearly revenues of $3.8 to $4.2 billion from coffee exports by 2020 and $4.5 billion by 2030. The Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development has instructed competent agencies to carry out synchronous solutions to ensure the tuna production chain.
The ministry said such solutions should focus on international cooperation and shipbuilding and technical requirements for fishery harbors. The ministry also urged relevant agencies to remove difficulties faced by businesses, especially those in accessing short-term credit loans for production. The Directorate of Fisheries said over 2,800 ships in the central provinces of Bình Định, Phú Yên, and Khánh Hòa are catching tuna. By mid-June 2015, Vietnam's tuna export revenue had exceeded $200 million. The U.S. has been the country's leading tuna import market, followed by the EU, ASEAN, and Japan.
Vietnamese pianist Lưu Hồng Quang won the second prize at an international piano competition recently held in Germany. More in the following report. The third Euregio Piano Awards was held for those aged from 18 to 35 and included 2 rounds. Competitors selected one of the works by Chopin, Beethoven, Haydn or Mozart, amongst others, to perform within a maximum period of 20 minutes in the first round and 45 minutes in the second one. Born into a musical family, Quang began studying the piano at the age of 6. He graduated from the Australian International Conservatorium of Music under a full scholarship in 2012. Since 2008, he has won awards in competitions in Australia, including winning a spot as a finalist for the Alison Anderson Piano Scholarship. His orchestral credits include the Hanoi Philharmonic Orchestra, the Vietnam National Symphony Orchestra, and the Florence Symphony Orchestra. The number of international tourists to Vietnam bounced back in July with nearly 593,600 arrivals, up 12.1% over the previous month and 5.1% against the same period last year. During the first 7 months of 2015, Vietnam welcomed nearly 4.4 million overseas visitors, a yearly decline of 9.4%, according to the General Statistics Office. Growing markets included the Republic of Korea, Finland, Singapore, Spain, Italy, the US, Taiwan, Germany, Japan, and the Netherlands. From January to July, the tourism sector served 43.1 million domestic vacationers and raked in over $10 billion in revenue, a year-on-year rise of 1.5%. Currently, the Ministry of Culture, Sports and Tourism and the Vietnam National Administration of Tourism are working with localities to implement the government's resolution on 5-year visa exemptions for Belarus and 1-year exemptions for 5 Western European countries, including the UK, France, Germany, Italy and Spain. A promotion program for tourists from the 5 Western European countries has been launched with high-quality products at competitive prices. With this program, the tourism sector hopes to record a 10% growth in the number of holidaymakers in the first half of 2016 and 20% in the remaining months of next year. And that has wrapped up our bulletin. Thank you for your attention. For more information, you can log on to our website at www.vietnamplus.vn. We'll see you soon.